Okay, let's dive in. When you think of Dionysus, what's the first image that pops into your head?
Well, for most people, I think it's probably wine, isn't it? Big
Yeah,
parties, revelry.
exactly. That god of wild parties, maybe a bit of chaos, uninhibited joy.
Mhm.
That's the popular idea.
That's definitely the familiar snapshot, yeah. The surface level. But, when you actually start digging into the sources,
Mm,
these ancient texts, the myths, looking at the art, you realize pretty quickly he's much, much more complex.
more profound, even.
Absolutely. Far more than just, like, the god of getting drunk.
And that's really our mission today, isn't it? We're taking all this material and going deep, moving past just the wine and chaos to really understand the full scope of Dionysus.
Yeah, we're talking about a god who touches on human liberation, deep transformation, the very origins of art, spirituality,
And those untamed parts of nature and, well, ourselves too.
and the paradoxes are just fascinating. I mean, he's called a twice-born god. He has this violent streak in some myths, but he's also a source of freedom.
Right, and his connection to the marginalized, those outside the usual social structures.
And the gender fluidity that often comes up in his descriptions and stories, plus this idea that his madness, quote unquote, isn't just crazy behavior, but maybe a path to some kind of wisdom, divine insight, perhaps.
It's a lot to unpack. So, yeah, this is a journey into one of Greek mythology's most intriguing figures, maybe one of the most challenging, too.
Definitely. Where should we start? The basics.
Let's ground ourselves first. What do the sources generally agree on, his fundamental domains?
Okay, so yes, god of wine, that's central, the grapevine, vegetation in general. But tied right into that are pleasure, festivity, and then the more intense stuff.
Yeah.
Madness, ritual frenzy, that wildness.
So they all seem connected, facets of the same power,
Exactly, this vibrant, overflowing energy. And you see it in his symbols, the things he's always depicted with.
like the Thyrsos.
Yeah, that classic staff tipped with a pine cone,
Yeah.
often wrapped in ivy.
His drinking cup, too, the Kantharos.
Right. And the ivy crown, the grapevines themselves, they're like immediate visual cues. You see them, you think Dionysus.
And how he looks in art, that varies quite a bit, doesn't it? Reflects that complexity we mentioned.
It really does. Sometimes, especially in earlier stuff, he's this older, bearded guy, looks quite dignified, wise almost.
But then often, maybe later on, he's shown as this very youthful figure.
Yeah.
Long hair, almost effeminate, languid, maybe.
That's a common depiction, yeah.
Mhm.
It's not just one single image they stuck to. It evolves.
And he's usually got his crew with him, right? His retinue.
Oh, definitely. You got the satyrs, those wild half-goat guys,
Yeah.
and the Maenads, his female followers, the ones in that state of Bacchic
The
frenzy.
ecstatic ones.
Yeah. And you can't forget Silenus, often shown as older, maybe a bit drunk, but surprisingly wise in some stories. Some sources even call him Dionysus's main teacher or guardian.
Interesting. Okay, so origins, the parentage.
Hmm.
The standard story is Zeus and Semele, the Theban princess.
That's the big one, the most famous version. But the sources, well, they immediately throw curveballs. Even just talking about his birth highlights how unusual he is. That twice-born aspect.
Which already tells you something's different, right? But the material mentions other possibilities, too, other parents.
Oh, yeah. Some traditions link him to Demeter or Persephone. Even figures from, like, completely different regions. It's not straightforward.
And his birthplace is all over the map, too.
Literally. Thebes is key, obviously, because of Semele. But you also see India, Libya, Crete, Knossos mentioned.
So what does that suggest? That his worship just popped up everywhere? Or that he was seen as a god who arrives?
That's a great way to put it. Maybe both. It suggests his cult wasn't just a single point spreading out, but maybe something adopted or emerging in different places. Or maybe it emphasizes his nature as an outsider god, someone who comes from elsewhere. Ancient writers even noticed this and thought maybe there were originally several different gods named Dionysus.
That's one way to handle the contradictions. But the Zeus and Semele story is the one that really sticks. Hera gets jealous.
Classic Hera. She tricks Semele into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his true divine form, his full glory.
Which, of course, no mortal can handle. So Semele is basically incinerated by lightning.
Tragic.
Oh.
But Zeus manages to rescue the unborn baby from the ashes. And this is the really unique part. He stitches the fetus into his own thigh to point it to.
Yeah, okay.
And that's where those epithets come from, the ones you see in the texts. Purgenes, born of fire, Mirophis, thigh sewn, and Inadagene or Ditokos, the twice-born.
It completely sets him apart from the start, a very unconventional birth, bypassing mortality in a way.
Absolutely. And his upbringing is just as varied in the stories after the thigh birth. He's initially given to Hermes, then sometimes to Semele's sister Ino and her husband Athamas.
But Hera interferes again.
She does, drives Ino and Athamas mad.
Hmm.
So Zeus has to step in again. Sometimes he turns Dionysus into a ram to hide him, and then takes him off to be raised by the nymphs of Mount Nysa.
Mount Nysa, and those nymphs get turned into stars later, the Hyades.
That's the story, yeah. A reward from Zeus. But other traditions mention different nurses or educators too. Groups like the Besseri, or a figure named Miscus who supposedly taught him his secret rites.
And Silenus often pops up again here, right, as the main teacher.
He does, which again links this wild god to a sort of unconventional, maybe earthy wisdom.
And just like his birthplace, this Mount Nysa, it's not one fixed place either.
Nope. The location shifts depending on the source. Thrace, Libya, India, wherever his worship was important. It really reinforces that idea of him being a god who travels, who diffuses, rather than being tied to one single spot.
That theme of travel, of arrival, seems absolutely central then. His wanderings, often kicked off by Hera's curse of madness.
That's often the trigger, yeah.
Yeah.
It sends him out into the world. He covers huge distances in these myths.
We hear about him in Egypt, being welcomed by King Proteus, but then in Syria there's a much more violent encounter, flaying someone named Damascus.
Yeah, shows that dangerous side too. And then there's the huge story, possibly a later edition, but very famous, the Indian expedition.
Right, where he leads an army, but not a normal army.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's his followers, satyrs, Maenads, maybe some demigods. And they conquer enemies, sure, but the emphasis is often on what he brings. He teaches viticulture, how to grow grapes and make wine. He founds cities, sets up laws, leaves monuments.
So kind of a civilizing force in his own unique, ecstatic way.
Exactly. Powered by this wild energy, but bringing culture too.
But then you get the myths about kings who try to resist him, and that doesn't go well, like Kyrgyz and Thrace.
A classic example.
Yeah.
Lycurgus attacks Dionysus' followers, rejecting the god. So Dionysus hits him with madness. Lycurgus ends up killing his own family, mutilating himself in some versions.
Horrifying.
And the land itself becomes barren until Lycurgus dies, often torn apart by horses. It's a brutal warning.
And the most famous one is probably Pentheus in Thebes, Dionysus' own hometown, basically.
Right. Pentheus, the king, refuses to accept Dionysus' divinity. He tries to shut down the Bacchic rituals happening up on Mount Cithaeron.
He spies on the women.
Big mistake.
Yeah.
He gets caught, and in this terrifying climax, you see it powerfully in a Euripides play.
Yeah.
The Bacchae. He's torn limb from limb by the Maenads, including his own mother, Agave, who's deep in the Bacchic frenzy.
Chilling. It's like the ultimate proof of his power and the danger of denying it.
Absolutely. Other cities get punished too, like Argos, for impiety, driving women mad to kill their babies in some versions, though eventually, even in Argos, he seems to be reconciled and worshipped.
It's not always resistance, though. In Athens, he gives the gift of wine to Icarius.
Yeah, though that story also has a tragic turn. The local shepherds drink the wine, don't understand its effects, think they've been poisoned, and kill Icarius.
Oh, right. But then Icarius and his daughter Aragone get turned into constellations.
Exactly. Boots and Virgo, according to some.
Yeah.
So even tragedy leads to a kind of divine transformation.
And the story with the pirates, that's a great one.
Isn't it? They capture him, and they can sell this pretty young man into slavery. Bad idea.
He reveals himself, turns the ship into a crazy scene with vines, wild animals, music.
Drives the pirates mad. They jump overboard and become dolphins.
Oh.
Except for the helmsman, the only one who recognized him as a god and warned the others. He gets spared.
It's such a vivid image of his power transformation, judgment, that wild energy taking over.
And then there's Naxos. He finds Ariadne there after Theseus abandoned her.
And marries her.
Yes. Their sons become kings in wine-rich regions, linking him to prosperity again. And Ariadne's crown, her diadem, becomes a constellation too, the Corona Borealis.
He even gets involved in Olympian family drama, persuading Hephaestus to let Hera go.
That story pops up too. Maybe he used wine to convince him, shows him interacting with the other major gods.
So all these myths, they're really different, but there's that consistent thread, isn't there? Resist his power, face madness and destruction.
But embrace it, or even just respectfully acknowledge it, and you might find liberation, prosperity, even some kind of divine connection or transformation.
Which brings us back to what we said at the start. He's so much more than just wine or these often violent stories.
Exactly. The sources really stress that he represents something more fundamental, that overflowing, intoxicating power within nature, the force that can, lift people out of their ordinary everyday lives.
And that's where we get into the deeper spiritual and psychological stuff, right?
Precisely. He is, at his core, the god of ecstasy, madness, and ritual frenzy. And let's unpack that word, ecstasis. It literally means standing outside oneself.
So not just being tipsy.
No, not at all.
Hmm.
The sources describe it as a profound spiritual state, a temporary letting go of your normal identity, your normal limits. It allows this felt connection with the divine, breaking free from mundane reality.
Which sounds potentially amazing, but also maybe scary?
Definitely intense. It could be terrifying, yes. But it was also seen as incredibly transformative. It wasn't just random chaos. It was seen as a pathway.
A pathway to what?
Well, sometimes prophecy and healing. He shared the oracle at Delphi with Apollo, apparently, and had his own oracle site in Thrace. He gets called Iatros, or Hugiates healer.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Healer? Yeah, invoked against disease. There were stories of him bringing cures through dreams at places like Amphiclea. He was even called the Osoter, the savior god, in that context.
Wow. That connects him much more broadly to life forces then.
Absolutely. It links him to the whole cycle. He's a god of fertility, vegetation, yes, but also the bigger cycle of life and death. His power is in that bursting growth in spring, the ripeness of summer, but also the decay in autumn and the promise of renewal. He embodies the rhythm of nature.
Like the vine itself, growing, bearing fruit, dying back, coming back again.
Perfectly put.
Mm.
And his impact on culture, especially art, is huge.
He's the god of theater and drama.
Undeniably. Ancient Greek tragedy and comedy, these amazing art forms that explore the absolute depths of what it means to be human, they grew directly out of festivals and rituals honoring Dionysus.
So he inspires performance, illusion, becoming someone else through a mask, through a story.
Exactly. It's like a structured way to channel that same ecstatic, transformative energy he embodies.
And then there's his social role. This connection to the marginalized seems really important in the sources.
It's one of his most compelling aspects. He's strongly associated with those often pushed to the edges of Greek society. Women, for instance, found a unique kind of freedom and agency in his cults. Slaves, foreigners too.
So his worship was a space for them, a kind of liberation.
It seems so. A temporary escape, maybe? An inversion of the usual social rules, a chance for followers to shed their everyday identities.
Which fits with the gender fluidity aspect too, right? The way he's sometimes depicted.
Absolutely. Sometimes shown with effeminate features or myths, might involve cross-dressing. He fundamentally challenges rigid categories, transcends boundaries, and his rituals allowed followers to explore that blurring of identity themselves.
So going back to his madness, the sources suggest it wasn't just like pointless frenzy.
Not at all. The idea seems to be that these rituals, this ecstatic state, could lead to profound insights, spiritual revelations. It was understood as a different pathway to truth, a kind of divine inspiration that you couldn't get through just, logic and reason.
His madness was a different way of knowing.
That's a great way to phrase it, yes.
So when you pull back from just the wine god image, wow, he's this fundamental force of transformation. Liberation, wildness, connecting to the divine through altered states. He shapes human emotion and spirituality in really profound ways.
And these weren't just abstract ideas.
Yeah.
They really shaped how people worshipped him, how his cult spread, and how they chose to represent him visually.
His cult traveled, picking up influences from places like Thrace, Phrygia, Lydia, even Egypt.
Yeah, which likely contributed to the development of the more orgiastic forms of worship. Especially later, maybe after Alexander the Great's time, when the Greek world had more contact with Eastern traditions.
And his companions in art and myth, they reflect that energy too.
Definitely. While maybe early on he was linked with calmer figures like the Graces, he's mostly known for that Bacchantic crew. The Maenades, Thyades, Bessari, all depicted in these states of high-energy, wild enthusiasm.
Plus the satyrs, Selene, Pans, centaurs, the wilder, earthier figures.
Exactly. They embody that untamed aspect.
What about sacrifices? Were they unusual?
Well, some sources hint at very early, maybe even human sacrifices. But later it seems to have shifted to more symbolic things, or sacrificing animals like rams.
And the art itself, visually, really captures his different sides. You said the earliest forms could be quite simple.
Very simple. Sometimes just a pillar with a mask-like head on top, or even just a phallus representing fertility.
But later art gets more detailed, showing different aspects.
Right, you get these distinct types. There's the infant Dionysus, often shown with Hermes or his nurses. Then that manly, bearded version, sometimes called the Indian Bacchus, maybe representing wisdom gained from his travels.
And then the really famous one, the youthful, sometimes effeminate, Theban Bacchus.
Yeah, often shown as ideally beautiful, maybe a bit languid, leaning on something. Praxiteles, the sculptor, is often associated with popularizing this type.
And finally, sometimes he has horns.
Yes, the horned Bacchus, connecting him to powerful animals like the ram or the bull. You see that a lot on coins, representing his potent, perhaps more primal energy.
And you find these images everywhere. Vases, mosaics.
All over. Vase paintings are full of them. That amazing mosaic from Pella showing him riding a panther. Frescoes, statues. The sheer variety just underscores how many different ways people understood and related to his power.
So, okay, pulling it all together now, it's clear Dionysus is just. He's full of paradoxes, complexities.
Absolutely. He embodies transformation, liberation, that wild energy, the power to connect with the divine maybe, and explore the edges of human experience in ways that go beyond just reason.
He really shapes emotion and spirituality, doesn't he?
Like few others in the Greek pantheon, I'd say. And all those different domains, the wine, the madness, the theater, fertility, they're not really separate things, are they?
No, they seem like different expressions of that core transformative power. How he affects the world, how he affects us.
Exactly. And his myths, his worship, they raise really deep questions, Is the madness a metaphor for the subconscious? Or maybe a kind of divine communication that operates outside logic?
And his connection to the marginalized, is that a critique of rigid social structures? Or just offering this temporary safety valve, this vision of inclusion?
It makes you think. Ultimately, I think understanding Dionysus means you have to embrace all these facets. You can't just label him the party god and be done with it. He resists easy categories.
He forces you to think about that balance, or maybe the tension between order and chaos, reason and emotion, fitting in and breaking free.
Yeah, the Apollonian versus the Dionysian, as Nietzsche would later frame it, that fundamental tension.
So yes, the wine is there, the revelry, the frenzy, it's all part of it. But the sources really show us that the true power of Dionysus, it runs so much deeper.
He's a god of radical transformation, a liberator of the spirit, a figure tied to the wildness in nature, and maybe most importantly, the wildness and complexity inside ourselves.
When you look closely at this material, his story touches on duality, pushing boundaries, that deep connection between the earthly and the divine.
It really does. Which leaves us with a thought, maybe. What does the fact that this figure, Dionysus, with his embrace of ecstasy, madness, the outsider, what does his enduring power tell us about the parts of ourselves and maybe our society that we often try to repress or misunderstand or maybe even fear?
That's definitely something to chew on. Maybe after this deep dive, you'll start noticing those Dionysian elements yourself popping up in unexpected places.